Podcasting from Ohio, the Buckeye State, this is Married to an African. Being married is hard work, but try being married to someone from a different culture. It's like trying to turn around on a one-way street. So let me help you navigate around all the obstacles. This is your host, Dehadi C., a queen who fell in love overseas in Dakar. Now, years later, 2 kids, a bunch of jobs and ups and downs, we're all still here together. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today's episode is titled Cultural Differences. Okay, so really quickly, let's just dive right into this. I met my husband in my early 20s. Talk about cultural differences. Hello. We were so culturally different and so young that we were just an atom bomb waiting to go off, okay? Love is so beautiful, but once you get past the I love yous and you have to really sign on the dotted line and understand what you signed up for, it'll make you think about some things, correct? Okay, so this cultural difference was probably the thing that stood out the most to me. Both of us actually, in the first couple of years of our marriage, there were 3 things that I found the most challenging culturally, and that was the emotional pressures from family members, the guilt from abandoning my culture or my religion, and then the community prejudice. Believe it or not, emotional pressure from family can definitely weigh a toll on your relationship. It's already fragile because you're going through so much once you get out of the honeymoon stage, right? But it's a lot of pressure for families to kind of understand what did you do? Who is this person? Making sure that he, 1 is not a terrorist, or 2 did not use you to get a green card. So you can't even go to them with your everyday marital issues because they already think you are crazy because you just married somebody you have no clue who this individual is. So the pressure to make this marriage work, the pressure to get this thing right is astronomous. So that was definitely one challenge for me. Another challenge was the guilt of abandoning my culture, my African American culture. What? Like, girl, you about to become African now? No, my husband is from West Africa. Clearly, we're not of American descent. So we all have some African descent. This is me trying to educate them, right? It doesn't even matter because there was still guilt. They still made me feel guilty about abandoning a culture that I wasn't trying to abandon. I'm just literally trying to mesh these 2 lives to the best of my abilities so that we can live in peace and harmony. But it wasn't just the guilt of abandoning culture. I'm not sure if many of you have, but sometimes women, such as myself, have converted into our husband's cultures. And that in itself, family members are like, wait a minute, hold up. Seriously? Really? So now you're not even this anymore. You're that. What kind of hold do he got on you? What kind of voodoo? They love to use the word voodoo. So that was definitely a challenge. And then lastly, the community prejudice. Okay. And that's on both ends because your spouse is going to receive prejudice. You're going to receive prejudice for dating outside of your culture. And then when you go overseas, many people are very welcoming, and that's a beautiful thing. But let's be honest, there's some people who look at them just like people look at us over here, like, oh, you had to go snag you up an American, huh? I know what that's about. And that's not the case. But again, those are things that just chip at the solidarity of a relationship. And those are the 3 things that I found to be most challenging at the very beginning of our marriage. Now, I don't care. We've been married together so long. I mean, it really rolls off our backs. But I could appreciate and understand someone coming to me with a concern earlier on in marriage and maybe even later on in marriage, because it really just depends on the kind of ties and the strongholds emotionally that people have with you. It just really depends on where you are in life. But those are the 3 things that I found most challenging. Now, let me tell you the things that I found that helped within these challenges. One was just learning about cultural differences. Study. It's so much information out there. Your husband is a whole resource. His family is a whole resource. If his family doesn't speak your language, or her family doesn't speak your language, don't even worry about that. Google is a whole resource. I used to go to the library and look in the children's section for books on my husband's culture, just so that I could read it in its most minutest detail format, just so I knew what I was getting myself into. And that worked for me. It might not work for you. You might like different measures. You might want to have a friend who's from that culture to kind of submerge you in slowly what to expect, the expectations expected upon you. Okay. And then the same thing goes for religion. This doesn't have to be a death sentence that your mate is not the same religion as you are. Okay. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to convert either. That just means that you need to learn about the cultural differences. And in learning, we are respecting, we are understanding, so that we don't do something or say something that is disrespectful and then someone's feelings are hurt, and it's a whole nother day. Okay, that's a whole nother day for that. Okay, all right. So yeah, definitely take time to discuss your differences, and it doesn't have to be like a blame game. Just discuss your differences. And just be like, oh, that's interesting. This is how I do it. I wonder how this is going to work for us. What are your suggestions? And I know that sounds very black and white, but literally, I think that's just the person I am. What do you think about this? And of course, my husband gets annoyed with all of my questions, but I'm not going to stop asking them, but I'm not also going to bombard him. And eventually he came around like, okay, what'd you say about this? Okay, let me tell you what we do. That worked for us. Also, asking tough questions. Do not bite on those tough questions. Don't grind on those tough questions. Say it. If the person loves you, seriously, they're not going to be offended by your tough questions, because most and foremost, you are your most important asset. And so you need to make sure that the things that you need in order to be fruitful in your marriage, and in order for you to be compassionate and empathetic and caring and, just fruitful, you need to ask those questions. Don't feel ashamed. And, sometimes husbands from different cultures, spouses from different cultures aren't as open as we are. So, don't choke the person trying to get the answer. Maybe you have to do a little bit by bit. You know what they say about honey? What's the phrase? You catch bees with honey. So you might have to sweeten it up a little bit to get your question out. And it might not come out exactly how you had thought of it to. But nonetheless, ask the tough questions. Find common ground. That's another thing that saved my life, honestly. Just reverting back to, this is why we're together. This is why I love you. This is what I see when I see you. This is what I see you do. This is what I hear you say. That got us back on track. And believe me, we've fallen off the track a couple times. Broken glass, collision, all of that. I do not have a perfect marriage, but I am fighting for my marriage every single day. And that is the truth. That is the truth. I have learned him because I love him, and I'm willing to change. I'm willing to put my pride aside. I'm willing to choose peace over power to make this work. Okay? Next is just effectively communicate. You guys, I am from 614. And if you don't know what that is, that's Ohio. Okay, that's Columbus. I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. So my parents were the best parents ever. We didn't live in the hood, but we lived right outside it. So we definitely got exposed to everything. Okay. And so what I know to do is to communicate. And I have no problem communicating for myself, but I definitely had to learn how to communicate when it came to my husband. All that rah-rah, all that lip smacking, that ain't gonna work. It might make you feel better, but it doesn't get the job done. And let me say this, I am not a biased person. This is both sides, because we know that people from different cultures have their ways and have their antics, and they speak with their hands and they move in their neck and stuff like that. Makes you feel some kind of way, right? Yeah, but we have to we got to have common ground, and we have to be able to talk and communicate effectively. And the way that this worked for me was saying, you know what, he's upset right now. I'm upset right now. Let's just not talk about it. Let's just not. If you want to say sorry to me and I say I accept your apology, but I want to go deeper on this subject matter at a later time, 2 days later, a day later, 3 days later, where we can both get out with how we feel without all the emotions tied to it, I'm for that. What I'm not for is arguing and spitting and throwing up and acting crazy and all of that stuff. It just wastes so much time, putting everybody on mute, not being intimate for weeks and weeks and weeks. I'm over it. I'm so serious, y'all, because it is so draining. Don't you think that's draining? I was so drained when I was doing things like that, when we both were doing things like that to each other. And so what I've learned is how to effectively communicate. Some spouses like to talk about it right on the spot, hit it right on the head. You know what I'm saying? When they say, cut me once, just get it over with. Okay. And then some people need to gather their thoughts, gather their words, gather their emotions, and then have a sit down. And that's what works for us. We're not the kind of couple that's like, okay, let's, because we just aren't. we just aren't. And that's okay. That's okay. Kudos to those who can, get it done right then and there. We need to simmer it down and then have a conversation. But yeah. And then lastly, find the beauty in your relationship. There is beauty in your relationship. Hard times don't mean that the whole thing is ruined or that the whole thing is over. Okay. And when I say hard times, I'm not including physical abuse, assault of any kind. I'm not including abuse of any kind. You're going to have bad days, but if you feel like you're in an abusive situation that is detrimental to your health, mental, physical, whatever, then you definitely need to seek a resource, an outside resource, so that you are safe. Because I'm not a counselor. I just have had enough experience to help individuals like yourselves along the way, because this is what was given to me. It's absolutely necessary that I give it back. Again, our marriage has many more years to come if God is willing, right? But the success of our marriage is because we both have said we've made mistakes. We're putting our pride and our ego to the side, and we're focusing on how to make this better. And it's an everyday walk. We don't always get it right. But finding the beauty in our relationship allows me to want to continue, allows him to want to continue and make sure that we, adhere to the vows that we made for each other and for the lives of our children, our grandchildren, and all that beautiful stuff, right? So the cultural differences, to sum up this podcast, is not to dwell on the fact that they are different, but to acknowledge that there's differences and then to set goals in place for how you are going to meet these differences. In the comment section below or in my inbox, let me know what some of the challenges that you have faced. Let's talk about it. I have so many other podcast episodes that are going to dive deeper into it, but I just wanted to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that cultural differences do weigh a toll on a marriage, but it doesn't have to ruin it, right? Okay, so those were my 3 challenges that I faced. Also in the comment section, share what your challenges have been. Share what your remedies for these challenges have been. And as always, I love to leave my podcast listeners with a quote, because I just feel like it helps us kind of like bring things together, and it leaves us with a word of thought. Whatever you are not changing, you are choosing. What are you changing, or what are you choosing? And in changing things, remember, it doesn't have to be a tug and war, it doesn't have to be a fight. But no, whatever you are not changing, you are choosing. All right, you guys, let's continue to grow. Let's continue to love. Let's continue to stay married.